So firstly, when we're considering dysregulation, it's really important to understand what regulation is, what it is to actually be able to drop into something that has a baseline of being present and being open in a way that has a sense of tolerance about it and has a sense of seeing different possibilities and points of view. And that's what in scientific terms might be called ventral vagus mode, really, present here and now. To be dysregulated is often to be caught in situations that are more in and of themselves going into the stress response. And whether that means that's going into fight or flight responses or the more kind of ancient freeze responses where we're kind of checked out, not even there. And it's quite easy for us to operate in a kind of not quite there way, particularly if we're operating in quite familiar circumstances. So dysregulation is like being caught in this readiness for danger, this perceived threat, and kind of staying there. And that's actually how a lot of us live in the modern world. We tend to have what's often called psychosocial stress. So it's the kind of stress that is not an immediate threat as we would have done living in the wild, but is very much part of our emotional landscape, our responses, many of which are unconscious. And that is looking out for ourselves, but it's also kind of looking out for the group. We're group animals. So when we go into this what we would call sympathetic dominance or sympathetic mode, which is the fight or flight response, we can often get caught there, and becomes quite a normal way of living, just to be slightly up, slightly ready, jangled. It's how a lot of people live, and it's how a lot of us live in the modern world because we have a lot of information coming in, we have a lot of overwhelm, expectations, things to do, little time to simply be. And being kept there tends to make us more essentially vigilant, more ready for danger, ready to go. And there's a dysregulation in that because often it's not appropriate to where we find ourselves in the moment. And so there's a dissonance, and that dissonance is that kind of misstep can be cognitive about how we're thinking about things, but also somatic or bodily. We're feeling our heart is racing, but if we look around us, then actually the circumstance might be, I don't need to be going into a full-on threat response at the moment. Or things can be triggering for us. We can be set off in these protective responses. So to recognize how we are is a really important part of this, because often we're so often just running on rails. We're used to, naturally, we can often find that we function quite well when we're in stress responses that we're used to being in. So it becomes difficult to help others and to help them come down to co-regulate with another person when we are in this stress response, or even just a little bit of this kind of looking out. And we can't pretend this stuff either. We pick this up from others. And this is very much part of being pack animals, is that we are built to sync up with the group, to co-regulate to whatever is happening. So that co-regulation might well be co-regulating to the fact that we all feel we should need to leave the building now as a potential threat. But so when we're talking co-regulation here, and we're talking about it in the context of coming down, in being in more present, more baseline, non-reactive tones, for us to have that sense of groundedness, that sense of being essentially earthed, and that really comes from a sense of knowing where we are in time and space, also allows others to navigate to there. It's like having a kind of flag in the ground. And it's what we also need in terms of our own regulation, which is orientation. We're always orientating. Where am I? Where's the door? You always need to know where the door is. Where are our escape routes in life? And knowing where we are, how we are, is a really key part of being that kind of rock for others to be able to navigate to as a resource. A definition of grounding could be a real and palpable sense of ourselves, our physicality, the size and shape that we are in the present moment. So that size and shape we are is pretty key in there, because it's not saying we're distorted or we're absent or that we can feel bits of us, but sense of, yeah, here I am in my entirety in this moment right now. And it's that which fosters a sense of trust, because it's somewhere to navigate to of someone who has a sense of, oh yeah, as opposed to being kind of up and away. So, somewhere to actually hold on to that doesn't feel it's going to go somewhere. Someone who is grounded, who is able to essentially access that sense of where they are in the here and now, has often either spent a lot of time practicing that in ways. It might be meditative ways, it might be spending a lot of time in nature, it might be really prioritizing having a relationship with their body, that kind of embodied awareness. It can be certain people have that quality, that just kind of really kind of rooted quality. And they're often people who go into professions that need that. But like anyone can be burnt out if we're not fostering, continually feeding into our own resources. So being able to have this sense of where we are in the here and now means having a continual relationship with that, a continual checking into those neural pathways, to that familiarity with coming back. Because the more we really get a sense of where we are in the here and now, the more we go back really quickly. The more we go, oh yeah, I need to do this. And actually we find that we do this all the time anyway. And some of that is quite functional, and some of that we're doing in ways that we're kind of compensating. So a lot of people will wring their hands, they will wash their hands underwater, they will touch their face, they will rock, all these things are essentially soothing. And we can bring these elements of self-soothing, this bringing our nervous system down to a place of essentially towards kind of parasympathetic tones, the opposite of the fight or flight response, in ways that we bring consciousness to, awareness to. So it's really interesting for us to know what we do when we're dysregulated or when we're grounding ourselves. So I kind of been through a rich history of this, and I've noticed over the years how I really do a lot of stuff with my hands, a lot of kind of squeezing. And the more that I've brought that into, oh yeah, this is what I do, this is really helpful, even looking at it, so there's a real visual presence of that with very visual people, the more it starts to become something that actually then feeds in as a resource. Knowing where we are in our feet and our hands is really useful. We can really gain, our hands are particularly agents of the brain. So similarly with our eyes and hands, incredibly related. So looking at ourselves, seeing where we are, moving our fingers, and looking at them can be incredibly useful. Similarly to touching parts of ourselves, the heart, not just about this resourcing of self-compassion, which is a really key part of that, but it is actually bringing our hand, a presence, warmth, to a part of us where we go into response of the stress, the fight or flight response. So it is bringing an awareness of our heartbeat, and we can have that relationship with that part of the nervous system that goes into those autonomic responses by bringing a hand here, but also really noticing quality of the out breath. It's the out breath that will bring us back down again. When we go into stress responses, we tend to clip the end of the exhalation with the inhalation. We tend to dominate on the and so finding our way back can really be about noticing the quality of the exhalation. So you might notice that you sigh, you kind of do noises like that when we're stressed. And those things we can really bring in, a sigh, an sound, naturally elongates the exhalation, and it opens out the jaw, it opens out the back of the throat, it opens out the mouth, and opens that channel down in towards this heart space. And all of that is really helping to let our nervous system know through the vagus nerve that things are okay. And that's a very, I love that kind of, that word is okay. Things are okay. It doesn't need to be, an extreme. It's just like a navigation back to, okay, I have space, I have room. So all of these things, hands, where our feet are. So what I'm doing now, because I'm focusing on this, is crossing my legs. And I do that, and I'm doing that quite strongly because it's proprioception. It's knowing where I am, knowing where my legs are, and knowing where my foot is on the ground. And for me, that's the self-regulation. So I'm doing that in order to get my thoughts together. But noticing how we do that, and the habits we have that are resourcing, and how we bring that into um, our own grounding, really supports how we self-regulate others. So that really can be as well finding a bit of solid ground. So could be holding a chair and talking to other people, could be touching something, a wall, a desk, a piece of furniture, something that's not going anywhere. That can really help us self-regulate. What you also might notice yourself doing, and see a lot of people do, is pace. So pacing, which could also be something like a walking meditation, is very, very supportive for bringing down levels of agitation and bringing them down towards the ground and allowing us to. So you might find, and you notice other people pacing around, if you kind of join them in a pacing and slow it down, meet someone else's resourcing and bring it into your own and slow it down, is a really kind of cogent way of starting to bring everyone down into a place where you can land collectively.